Hey everyone, Jeff McElrain here, and today I want to talk about the controversial subject of Relic guitars. I know they've been around for a really long time, but why do I prefer Relic style guitars over brand new non-Relic guitars? First thing is feel. I love the way an old guitar feels. I have a few old guitars, vintage ones, and they feel great. That's the first thing about them. When you pick them up, you're like, it just feels like they've been being played for years, because they have been. So when I buy a new guitar, I really want that same kind of feel. Now, it will happen over time if I play the guitar, of course, but if someone's kind of helped it on its way, or I automatically have the feel of a vintage guitar without the other problems that you will have that I will talk about later if you have a vintage guitar or if you want to get a vintage guitar. So for me, I just love the feel of a Relic guitar. That worn-in feeling on the neck, finishes off, if it's done really well, the rounded fingerboard. Now, of course, the fake fingerboard wear, I'm kind of on the fence with that. Over time, that would happen naturally. It looks cool, so, you know, I'm kind of torn about that, but if I love the guitar, I just overlook that, and eventually I would have done that as well. It just kind of helped it along its way. Number two is the sound. Not all vintage guitars sound great. Not all Relic guitars sound great, and not all brand new guitars sound great. In my experience, I have discovered that I think, well, it's psychosomatic or not, I prefer the sound, generally speaking, of a Relic guitar. My theory on this is kind of proven by a lot of people.
Well, Chris, what is it that it is, this theory of mine?
Many of the Relic guitars that you would buy from, say, Fender Custom Shop or Masterbuilt, or all these other companies that make great Relic versions of Fender or Gibson style guitars, use the original finish that Fender used in the 60s and 50s. So it's a nitrocellulose finish, it's very thin, and it wears naturally. Since it's so thin, you're not caking the guitar in a thick polyurethane finish. Now, if you're using a very thin polyurethane finish, like guys like John Suhr do, he knows what he's doing. I don't know if there's a huge sonic difference. I do like the way the guitar ages naturally when playing. So if I look at my 1964 Stratocaster, I've added a lot of wear into this. This whole arm wear was not there when I got the guitar 5 years ago. So it's through playing it that a lot of these things have happened, because this finish will wear away naturally. If you have a polyurethane finish, those things will not happen. The guitar will not wear away in the same way. Real fast, I want to let you know that I have my free ebook, Arpeggios Unlocked, with accompanying video. All you just do is sign up on the link above and below, enroll in the course. You get that for free. 20-minute video mini course with accompanying PDFs on how you can work through your 7th arpeggios. And while you're there, please feel free to poke around JM Guitar Lessons, where I give all my guitar lessons and all my courses. So a thin nitrocellulose finish done properly will, over time, wear away like an old guitar did. But more importantly, to me, that thin finish and the way it dries takes on a different sonic quality than a guitar that is covered in a very thick polyurethane finish. I had an old Charvel and old Jacksons years ago. I remember I got a chip in my old Jackson, and I realized how thick the paint was on that. It was really, really thick. It was like 1/8 of an inch or something. Maybe I'm exaggerating. I don't have the guitar for a long time, but this chunk fell off, and I was like, wow, that is a lot of paint. It kind of struck me at that moment in time. Well, if I'm strumming an acoustic guitar, for instance, or even my electric, and you put your hand on the body, the sound becomes a little muted. So if your guitar is really under a thick polyurethane finish, that can happen as well. There are lots of videos on YouTube about people stripping their guitars and how different they sound after the fact, and how much weight a polyurethane finish can add to an instrument.
So this thickness right here is way thicker than a sealer, primer, color coat, and 6 coats of clear. It's still thicker.
Number 3 is going to be vibe and aesthetics. I just think they look cool. I think the ones that look like they've been dragged behind the back of a car and are completely stripped, those are the ones I don't love because that's sort of unnatural wear unless you have like Rory Gallagher's guitar, which I think was found in a ditch that somebody stole it, and there was reasons why it looked that way. And Stevie's guitar played through, so if there's something that's really iconic, like a copy of somebody else's, that's up to you if that's something you want. But if something is sort of lightly aged like this one, I really like it because it's kind of helping it on its way. It just looks cool to me. It evokes a certain feeling that makes me want to play the guitar, maybe more so than a brand new guitar. I know it can be a little cheesy, it's like buying jeans with holes in them, but I don't know. It's part of the thing. I just love it. So when I see a guitar like this, my mind goes to one of my favorite guitar players of all time is Eric Johnson and something like his Virginia guitar. I love it. I remember Jeff Beck playing this kind of guitar on a number of gigs when I was growing up watching those videos. I always wanted that. So for me, it evokes a certain feeling. It's just sexy.
I want a diamond ring, I want some bracelets and everything. Daddy.
Now let's talk about a vintage guitar versus a Relic guitar. Why would I buy a Relic guitar over a vintage guitar? Well, the first thing is cost, right? A vintage guitar is very, very expensive, of course. I have a few that I've gotten over time and wheeled and dealed and sold and all these kind of things. But when I go on tour, say in Europe, I don't want to bring one of my vintage guitars with me for obvious reasons. Of course, all my guitars are insured, but you don't want one of those stolen or go missing on an airplane. They're somewhat irreplaceable. So what I want to do is get a guitar that feels similar to the vintage guitar that I normally use, and I want to be able to use that freely, take it around gigs in the subway. I'm not too careful with my guitars. I just play them because I own them and I want to play them. But especially something like traveling internationally where you don't have the guitar with you at all times. When I have my vintage guitar with me, it never leaves my sight. If I'm traveling with it, it goes overhead. Now, of course, I actually do the same thing with a non-vintage guitar that is, whether it's Relic or not. I don't want to lose any of my guitars. But there is a difference financially and kind of emotionally for me because not all vintage guitars are great. If you find a great one, that's a real valuable thing. Another problem with a vintage guitar is it's an old guitar, and there are all sorts of things with old guitars. There are very few guitar repairmen that I know. There's like 3 or 4 people that I know that I would trust one of my vintage instruments to. Not all of them are local either. So Holger Notzel, my friend Matt Brewster at 30th Street, Michael Tuttle. Those are like the 3 guys that I would trust with a vintage instrument because I know them very, very well. The great thing about having a guitar like this is it has all those vibes, and if you get a good one, it can sound really great. Like this one, I can bring it out on the road with me. Feels like the old guitar, and if a piece breaks or a piece falls off or something happens, I don't have to deal with vintage value. These are new tuners. This is a new bridge. It just happens to look old and has the vibe. Now, do vintage guitars sound better than Relic guitars or new guitars? I think my friend Matt Schofield put it the best when he said, not all vintage guitars are great, but the greatest guitars I have played happen to have been vintage. So I agree with that. My favorite guitars that I've heard are always been the vintage ones, but they set the bar, the high watermark, and you can find a really nice new guitar, a Relic, that can get pretty close, gets you into that ballpark. A really important thing to understand, besides the wood variable, that sometimes just a piece of wood just doesn't sound that great, is a vintage guitar has been a guitar for 50, 60, 30, 40 years, whatever it turns out to be. A new guitar was a tree maybe a year ago. So that's really something to think about. If you've got a really good sounding new guitar, it is only going to sound better the more you play it. Some people will argue this fact. It's been my personal experience that guitars just sound better the more you play them. Ron Ellis has told me the more you play his pickups, the better they sound. And who am I to argue with Ron Ellis? It's absolutely true. The more you play the guitar. So this is a new guitar, looks kind of old. If I start playing it a lot for the next few years, it's only going to sound better and better. And at some point, in 50 years, will it sound as good as my vintage guitar? Very well could be. One thing I highly recommend, if you have something like a vintage guitar and you get a new guitar and you think the new guitar sounds really, really great, and then you A/B it against a vintage guitar and suddenly you start to feel bad, like, oh man, that sounds so much better, I would refer you to the previous comment that it's a new guitar. If it sounds in the ballpark of the old one, like 75, 80% there, whatever that number may be, it will sound better over time. It just will. You got to trust me on that. Will it ever sound as good as the old one? Who knows? Sometimes you got that old growth wood, all these kind of things that people talk about, the nitro finish, all these things that are a little more intangible or totally tangible and just you can't get that wood anymore. There's all those things. But if you've got a really nice sounding new guitar, just play the heck out of it and it's just going to sound better and better. One thing I want to mention really quick is these are the Ron Ellis 1954 set, and I want to thank Ron for sending these over to me. They sound absolutely amazing. If you like this video, please hit the like and subscribe button, as it really helps me out quite a bit. Also, don't forget you can get my free ebook, Arpeggios Unlocked. Just use the link below. Just register. You got the free ebook and accompanying videos on me. So until the next time, I'm Jeff Mackerlane. Thanks so much.